The sky burned amber on the horizon when Hannah Russell first saw her family's homestead engulfed in flames. The memory of that night seared into her mind like a brand on cattle, permanent, painful, and impossible to forget. It was June of 1876, and at 22 years old, Hannah had just become utterly alone in the vast Montana territory. Hannah's dark hair whipped around her face as she stood on the ridge overlooking what remained of her family's cabin. The acrid smoke still hung in the air, though the fire had died out hours ago. Her fingers clutched the small leather-bound Bible she'd managed to salvage, the only possession remaining from her previous life. The home her father had built, the farm they had tended, and worst of all, her parents and younger brother, all gone in a single night while she had been delivering eggs to a neighboring homestead. They didn't suffer, Sheriff Wilson had told her, his weathered face etched with genuine sorrow. The fire spread too quick while they slept. His words were meant to comfort, but they echoed hollowly in her mind as she stood amid the ashes, her blue calico dress stained with soot and tears. The townsfolk of Willow Creek had been kind enough. The minister's wife offered her a place to stay, and others brought food and clothes, but Hannah felt like a ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives. She helped at the general store to earn her keep, stacking cans and sweeping floors with mechanical precision while her mind remained trapped in that burning cabin. "Miss Russell, you'll stay with us as long as you need, Mrs. Peterson," the minister's plump, kind-hearted wife would say, but Hannah could see the burden of another mouth to feed weighing on the woman's shoulders. 2 months after the fire, Hannah stood at her family's graves on the small hill behind the church. The wooden crosses were still new, the earth still slightly mounded. She placed wildflowers at each marker, her throat tight with unshed tears. "Excuse me, madam." The deep voice startled her. Hannah turned to find a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He stepped forward, and she could make out his features, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes the color of the Montana sky, and a worn leather hat that had seen better days. "I didn't mean to disturb your grieving," he said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "Name's Yates." "Yancey Yates," Hannah nodded, wiping hastily at her eyes. "Hannah Russell." "I know who you are, Miss Russell. Whole town knows your story." His voice was gentle, lacking the pity she'd grown to despise. "I've been working cattle for the Blackwell Ranch north of here, but I'm striking out on my own now. Bought a plot of land about 3 miles east of town." Hannah wasn't sure why he was telling her this or what he wanted. She remained silent, watching him turn his hat in his large, calloused hands. "Thing is, I heard you're still staying with the Petersons, and well, I came to make you an offer." Yancey shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm good with my hands. Built the bunkhouse at Blackwell's place and helped with the schoolhouse in town. I could build you a cabin." "On your family's land if you want it." Hannah blinked, certain she'd misheard him. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "My ma and sister died in a fire when I was 14, he said simply. "Pa and I had each other to lean on. You don't have anyone. It ain't right." "I can't pay you," Hannah said, her pride warring with desperate hope. "I'm not asking for payment, Miss Russell." Yancey put his hat back on. "Just seems the Christian thing to do. Think on it. I'll be at Sutter's saloon till sundown if you want to talk more." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Hannah staring after him, wondering if salvation could come in the form of a tall cowboy with kind eyes and rough hands. That evening, after helping Mrs. Peterson with dinner dishes, Hannah made her decision. She walked the dusty main street to Sutter's saloon, hesitating at the batwing doors. She'd never entered such an establishment. Her father would have been scandalized, but desperation pushed her forward. The piano music and raucous laughter assaulted her ears as she stepped inside. Heads turned, conversations paused, and Hannah felt her cheeks burn under the scrutiny. She spotted Yancey at a corner table, nursing a whiskey and playing cards with 2 other men. His eyes widened when he saw her, and he immediately stood, grabbing his hat. "Miss Russell." He nodded to his companions and crossed the room to her. Perhaps we should talk outside. Once on the boardwalk, Hannah took a deep breath of the cool evening air. I've thought about your offer, Mr. Yates. And his expression remained unreadable in the lamplight. I'd be grateful for your help, though I insist on doing what I can to assist. I can cook and we'll work out the details, he said with a slight smile. I'll ride out tomorrow to look at the land, see what can be salvaged. The next morning, Hannah led Yancey to her family's property. The blackened remnants of the cabin stood like a monument to her loss. Yancey walked the perimeter, examining the foundation and what remained of the structure. We'll need to clear this away first, he said, his expression thoughtful. The well is still good, that's something. And these timbers here might be salvageable, he looked at Hannah. It won't be exactly like it was before, is that all right? Hannah nodded, her throat tight. I just need somewhere to start again. Yancey began work the following day. He arrived at dawn with a wagon loaded with tools and supplies. Hannah came with him, having convinced Mrs. Peterson she would be perfectly proper staying in the small tent Yancey had brought for her while he slept under the stars. The first week was spent clearing the debris. Yancey worked tirelessly, his muscles straining under his shirt as he hauled charred beams and collapsed walls. Hannah worked alongside him, her hands soon blistered and her face streaked with dirt and sweat. You don't have to push yourself so hard, Yancey told her one evening as they sat by the campfire. This is man's work. Hannah's chin lifted. It's my home. My work is just as valuable as yours. Something like respect flickered in his eyes and he nodded. Fair enough. As the days passed, Hannah learned more about Yancey. He was 28, had been working cattle since he was 15, and could build almost anything with his hands. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried weight. Why aren't you married? She asked one evening as they shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Yancey's mouth quirked into a half-smile. Never found a woman willing to put up with a man who spends more time with cattle than people. And your father passed 4 years ago. Heart gave out during a cattle drive. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Hannah saw the grief in the tightening of his jaw. By the end of the second week, the foundation was repaired and the frame of the new cabin began to take shape. Yancey had ridden to town for more supplies, and Hannah watched in amazement as he skillfully notched logs and fitted them together. You're good at this, she observed, handing him nails from the pouch at her waist. Had a lot of practice, he replied, hammering with precision. After Ma and Sarah died, Pa and I rebuilt too. Hannah paused, studying his profile. Does it ever stop hurting? Yancey's hammering slowed, then stopped. He didn't look at her when he answered. No, but you learn to build around the pain, like reinforcing a weak spot in a foundation. It's still there, but it doesn't make the whole structure collapse. That night, when Yancey thought she was asleep in her tent, Hannah heard him singing softly by the fire an old hymn her mother used to sing. Tears slid down her cheeks as she listened, but for the first time they weren't entirely from grief. As summer turned to early fall, the cabin took form. Yancey added a stone fireplace, a sturdy front porch, and windows salvaged from an abandoned homestead several miles away. Hannah planted a small vegetable garden behind the cabin, hoping it would yield something before the first frost. They fell into a comfortable routine. Hannah would rise early to prepare breakfast while Yancey fetched water and tended to his horse. They would work through the day, breaking only for meals, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes sharing comfortable silence. Tell me about them, Yancey said one evening, nodding toward the 3 simple crosses Hannah had erected near a cottonwood tree. Your family. Hannah's breath caught, but she found herself wanting to share. My father was stubborn. Came out here from Pennsylvania because he believed the West was where a man could truly be free. My mother thought he was crazy, but she loved him too much to let him go alone. She smiled at the memory. Thomas, my brother, was just 16. He wanted to be a doctor someday. They sound like good people. They were. Hannah looked into the flames. Pa and I argued the night before the fire. He didn't want me riding alone to the Campbell place to deliver eggs. Said it wasn't proper. Her voice broke. "If I'd listened, you'd have died with them," Yancey said firmly. "And then where would I be with all this work and no one to cook my meals?" The gentle teasing surprised a laugh from Hannah, and she realized it was the first time she'd laughed since the fire. Yancey's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled back, and something warm unfurled in her chest. The cabin was nearly complete by mid-September. Yancey had built a simple bed frame, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves along one wall. Hannah had sewn curtains from fabric the minister's wife had given her and stuffed a mattress with clean straw. "It's not fancy," Yancey said, standing in the doorway and surveying their work, "but it'll keep you warm and dry." Hannah touched the smooth wood of the doorframe, overwhelmed with gratitude. "It's perfect." That night they celebrated with a special meal. Hannah had traded some of her needlework for a small chicken, which she roasted with wild onions and the potatoes she'd harvested from her garden. "To new beginnings," Yancey said, raising his tin cup of coffee. Hannah raised hers in return. "And to good friends." Something flickered in Yancey's eyes, but he merely nodded and turned his attention to his plate. The next morning, Hannah woke to find Yancey packing his saddlebags. "You're leaving?" she asked, her heart sinking. "Cabin's done," he said, not meeting her gaze. "Time for me to get started on my own place before winter sets in." Hannah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. No need for thanks." Yancey finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I'll check in on you now and then if that's all right. I'd like that." He mounted his horse, tipped his hat, and rode away. Hannah watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned back to her new cabin, empty now without his presence. The first weeks alone were the hardest. Hannah kept busy tending her garden, preserving food for winter, and making the cabin truly her own, but the silence was deafening after Yancey's departure. She made weekly trips into town for supplies and human contact, gradually rebuilding her life one day at a time. True to his word, Yancey rode by every few weeks. His visits were brief. He would check the roof, chop extra firewood, or fix a squeaky door, but Hannah looked forward to them more than she cared to admit. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the Montana landscape in white. Hannah's little cabin stood strong against the bitter cold, the stone fireplace Yancey had built keeping her warm as howling winds buffeted the walls. On a particularly fierce December night, Hannah was startled by pounding on her door. She opened it to find Yancey, snow-covered and shivering. "Storm caught me," he explained through chattering teeth. "My place is too far." Hannah pulled him inside, helping him remove his frozen coat. "Sit by the fire, I'll make coffee." As Yancey thawed, Hannah noticed blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt," he glanced at his arm as if surprised. "Branch caught me when my horse spooked. It's nothing." Hannah ignored his protests and cleaned the gash, bandaging it with strips of clean cloth. Her fingers lingered on his forearm, feeling the strength beneath his skin. "Thank you," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. The firelight cast golden shadows across his face, and Hannah suddenly realized how close they were sitting. She pulled back, flustered. "You should rest. You can take the bed. I'll make a pallet by the fire." "I won't put you out of your bed," he insisted. "The floor is fine for me." In the end, neither would yield, so they shared the small space near the fireplace. Hannah on her mattress pulled from the bed frame, and Yancey on blankets spread nearby. Though propriety demanded distance, the intimate setting of the cabin, his cabin, built with his hands, created a connection that transcended physical space. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Yancey asked into the darkness. Hannah stared at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. "Sometimes. But it's a different kind of loneliness than what I felt in town. There I was surrounded by people but still alone. Here I'm alone but somehow feel connected to the land, to my family's memory." She paused. "To you." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling fire and the howling wind. "I think about you," Yancey finally said, his voice rough. "When I'm working on my place, I wonder if you're warm enough, if you have enough food, if you're afraid." "I'm not afraid anymore," Hannah whispered. You gave me that. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them together in the small cabin. They talked more in those 3 days than they had in all the months before. Yancey told her about his dreams for his ranch, his hope to raise horses instead of cattle. Hannah shared her memories of Pennsylvania, the books she loved, and her secret wish to someday teach children. On the morning of the 4th day, the storm broke, and sunlight sparkled on the pristine snow. Yancey stood at the window, his expression troubled. "I should go," he said. "People will talk if they know I've been here." "Let them talk," Hannah replied with newfound boldness. "We've done nothing wrong." Yancey turned to her, his eyes serious. "Your reputation matters less to me than your friendship." She stepped closer to him. "Will you come back, not just to check on the cabin but to see me?" Something changed in his expression then, a softening around the eyes, a slight upturn of his mouth. "Yes, Hannah, I'll come back." After Yancey left, Hannah found herself counting the days until his next visit. She busied herself with household tasks, began knitting a scarf for him as a Christmas gift, and wrote long entries in her journal about her growing feelings for the quiet cowboy who had rebuilt more than just her home. True to his word, Yancey returned the following week, bringing with him a small pine tree. "Thought you might want this," he said somewhat sheepishly. "For Christmas." They decorated it together with paper stars Hannah had cut and dried berries she had strung on thread. It was a simple tree, but to Hannah it was beautiful. "Stay for supper," she said when they finished. It wasn't a question over the meal. Yancey seemed distracted, his responses brief and his gaze often drifting to the window. "Is something wrong?" Hannah finally asked. Yancey set down his fork and took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about propriety and reputation and what's right." Hannah's heart sank. "And you've decided it's better not to visit so often?" "No." Yancey reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, took her hand in his. "I've decided that if people are going to talk anyway, they might as well talk about something real." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Hannah Russell, that I'm falling in love with you." The words rushed out of him like water through a broken dam. "I didn't build this cabin as charity. I built it because I couldn't bear to see you hurting. Because from the moment I saw you at those graves, something in me recognized something in you." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. "Yancey." "You don't have to say anything now," he said quickly. "I know it might be too soon after your loss, and I'm not asking for promises. I just wanted you to know that when I come here, it's not out of duty. It's because being with you feels like coming home." Tears filled Hannah's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. She squeezed his hand. "I feel the same way." The smile that broke across Yancey's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He stood, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. With gentle reverence, he cupped her face in his calloused palms and kissed her a kiss as solid and true as the cabin he had built for her. That Christmas was the first of many they would spend together. Yancey brought Hannah to see his land, a promising stretch of valley with a clear creek running through it. His own cabin was rougher than hers, clearly built with haste to have shelter before winter. "It's not much yet," he apologized. "It's a beginning," she corrected him. As winter gave way to spring, their relationship blossomed like the wildflowers covering the hills. Yancey spent more time at Hannah's cabin than his own, helping her plant a larger garden and build a chicken coop. They rode together to town for supplies, no longer hiding their attachment, though it raised a few eyebrows among the more gossipy townsfolk. "Let them talk," Yancey said, echoing Hannah's earlier sentiment. "What we have is honest and good." One warm evening in May, nearly a year after the fire that had taken Hannah's family, Yancey arrived with his saddlebags fuller than usual. "I brought something," he said, reaching inside and pulling out a small, worn book. "Found it in a bookshop in Helena last month when I went for supplies. Been saving it for the right moment." Hannah took the book, a collection of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, her breath caught. "My mother had this same edition. I used to read it aloud to her while she mended clothes." "Open it," Yancey urged gently. Inside, pressed between the pages, was a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," Yancey explained as Hannah looked up at him with wide eyes. Pa gave it to me before he died, said to save it for when I found a woman strong enough to stand beside me, not behind me. He took the ring from her trembling fingers and knelt before her. Hannah Russell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, Yancey, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her in his arms, kissing her with all the love he had built in his heart, just as he had built her cabin with his hands. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Willow Creek. The minister spoke of God bringing beauty from ashes, and Hannah, wearing a simple white dress sewn by Mrs. Peterson, felt the truth of those words deep in her soul. After the ceremony, they rode to Yancey's land, where a surprise awaited. During the weeks leading up to the wedding, Yancey had been mysteriously absent several days, claiming ranch business. Now Hannah understood why. Next to his rough cabin stood a new structure, a spacious barn with fresh paint and sturdy doors. For those horses you want to raise, Hannah said, smiling through happy tears. Yancey squeezed her hand. For our future. That night, as husband and wife, they shared their dreams under a canopy of stars. They would live at Hannah's cabin until they could expand Yancey's home, then combine their lands into one ranch. They would raise horses and crops, and God willing, children to fill the rooms Yancey would build. Do you ever wonder why the fire happened? Hannah asked, her head resting on Yancey's chest. Not how, but why. Why my family was taken. Yancey was quiet for a long moment, his fingers gently stroking her hair. I don't know if there's an answer to that, at least not one we can understand in this life. But I do know that, without that tragedy, we might never have found each other. So something good came from something terrible. Life has a way of doing that, Yancey agreed. Like how a forest grows back stronger after a fire, the old growth has to clear for the new to thrive. Hannah thought about this, about the mysterious ways God worked in their lives. I'll always miss them, she whispered, but I'm grateful for the life we're building. And I'll spend every day making sure it's a life worthy of your strength, Yancey promised. The years that followed were not without challenges. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with blizzards that trapped them indoors for weeks. Their initial crops struggled in the unpredictable Montana weather, and their first foal died shortly after birth, leaving Hannah heartbroken. But for every hardship, there were double the blessings. Their combined land flourished under their care. Yancey's skill with horses became known throughout the territory, bringing buyers from as far as Wyoming and Dakota. Hannah started teaching the children of nearby homesteaders 3 days a week, fulfilling her dream of being an educator. And in the spring of their second year of marriage, their daughter was born, Sarah Elizabeth Yates, named for Yancey's sister and Hannah's mother. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair, and from her first cry she had both their hearts. She's perfect, Yancey whispered, cradling his daughter with hands that had built cabins and gentled wild horses, now tender with this tiny new life. Hannah watched them, overwhelmed with love. She is. As Sarah grew, so did their ranch. Yancey expanded his cabin into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, room to grow. He told Hannah with a wink a large kitchen, and a sitting room with bookshelves he built especially for Hannah's growing collection. The 5th anniversary of the fire that had taken Hannah's family arrived on a beautiful June day. Hannah, now pregnant with their second child, stood with Yancey and 4-year-old Sarah at the 3 crosses, now surrounded by wildflowers. These were your grandparents and uncle, Hannah explained to Sarah, who solemnly placed dandelions she had picked at each cross. Do they live in heaven with Jesus? Sarah asked. Yes, sweetheart, Hannah replied, her hand resting on her swollen belly. And someday, a long time from now, we'll see them again. But not yet, Yancey added, wrapping his arm around Hannah's shoulders. We have a lot of living to do first. Hannah leaned into his strength, grateful beyond words for the man who had literally built her a new life from the ashes of the old. Yes, she agreed. A whole lifetime together. That fall, their son was born, Thomas James Yates, strong and sturdy like his father. The following spring, Yancey completed a small schoolhouse on their property, where Hannah now taught a dozen children from the surrounding homesteads. "You've built me a home, a family, and now a school," Hannah marveled as they stood admiring the finished structure. "Is there anything your hands can't create?" Yancey smiled, pulling her close. "They can't create time. Wish I could build us more of that." "We'll make the most of what we have," Hannah promised, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. As their children grew, so did their ranch and their love. They weathered droughts and floods, celebrations and sorrows, always together, always strong. Yancey's horses became some of the most sought after in the territory, and Hannah's little school gained a reputation for excellence. On the 20th anniversary of the fire, Hannah and Yancey hosted a gathering of friends, neighbors, and their now teenage children. As twilight fell, Hannah found a moment alone with her husband on the porch of their home. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" she asked, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink colors that once reminded her only of flames and loss, but now spoke of beauty and endings that led to new beginnings. "Every day," Yancey admitted, his hair now streaked with silver at the temples but his eyes still as blue and clear as the day they'd met. "But I wouldn't change a thing, not if it meant losing what we've built together." Hannah turned in his arms to face him, seeing in his weathered features the same strong, kind man who had approached her at her family's graves all those years ago. "Neither would I." Yancey's calloused thumb traced her cheekbone. "You know, I set out to build you a cabin, but you ended up building me a life." "We built it together," Hannah corrected gently, "board by board, day by day." As darkness settled over the land they'd cultivated together, they remained on the porch, surrounded by the sound of their children's laughter from inside and the distant nickering of horses in the barn. Hannah thought of the family she had lost and the family she had gained, of the mysterious ways God worked to bring light from darkness, and of the man beside her who had given her not just shelter but a home. "I love you, Yancey Yates," she whispered into the gathering night. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days were granted." His arms tightened around her, solid and secure as the cabin he had built with his own two hands. "And I love you, Hannah Yates, for as long as there are stars in the Montana sky." Together, they watched as the first evening star appeared, a single point of light in the vast darkness like the spark of hope that had ignited between them amid the ashes of loss, growing over the years into the warm, enduring flame of a love built to last. In the decades that followed, their land became one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. Their children grew tall and strong, with Sarah eventually taking over Hannah's school and Thomas working the ranch alongside his father. Two more children joined their family, Rebecca and Daniel, completing their circle of love. As Hannah and Yancey entered their golden years, they often sat together on the porch of the house that had grown from that first simple cabin. Their hands, both now wrinkled and worn from years of work, remained entwined as they watched grandchildren play in the yard where once only ashes had lain. "We built something good, didn't we?" Yancey asked one evening, his voice softer with age but still carrying the strength that had first drawn Hannah to him. Hannah squeezed his hand, remembering the young cowboy who had approached her at her darkest moment and offered not just help but hope. "Better than good," she replied. "We built something that will outlast us both." And as the sun set on another day of the life they had crafted together, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that though fire had once taken everything from her, what had risen from those ashes, this love, this family, this legacy, was stronger than anything flames could ever destroy.